I am so excited to welcome my next guest, Nick Bryant. Nick, you have been reporting on Jeffrey Epstein for more than a decade, frankly, since before most people ever heard his name. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm glad to be with you, Jason.
It's great to see you. And by the way, we should also, for people who haven't seen you before, I don't know if they've been living under a rock, but you're not just coming to this story from the Jeffrey Epstein angle. You've done incredible groundbreaking reporting on all kinds of aspects of the intelligence world and the deep state, as it were. So I think you've got some particularly interesting perspectives on this story. Everybody's pretty upset about what Donald Trump said the other day in his cabinet meeting. What's your take on this latest development?
Well, people should be upset. People should be outraged. I've gotten a lot of calls and texts and emails that people are very outraged. First, he promised us transparency. And then Bondi gave us a nothing sandwich. And then she said that the Department of Justice and FBI had to vet the thousands of hours of child abuse material and the hundreds of victims. And then Kash Patel came out and said that the videos were a fiction. The videos, any kind of compromised videos or videos with other guys, were a fiction. And then Bongino came out and said that, whereas he'd questioned the death narrative of Epstein, he came out and said it's a suicide. So these guys are doing 180s on what they had said. And this is a very important issue for Americans. And we don't want our children molested with impunity. And the way that Trump just bullied a reporter just wanted to know what was happening. How did they come up with that? And the way that Trump bullied him was really egregious. And I think Americans have every reason to be very upset with this government, because child trafficking, and Jeffrey Epstein was running a child trafficking network. Child trafficking is a horrid experience for the victims. And the fact that these victims have been molested with impunity is that they were flown to this island and that it was only Jeffrey Epstein molesting them. I mean, the cover story by the government, that memo, is just categorical bunk, except one thing. I will agree that there's over 1,000 victims. So I can agree with that document on that particular sentence, that there is over 1,000 victims. I've always said that there's over 1,000 victims.
The other thing that's interesting is, as I said, you've been covering this for so long, and by this, I mean not just the Jeffrey Epstein angle. You've written about Boys Town and the whole that scandal with what's his name, Larry King, Lawrence King.
The Franklin scandal.
Yeah. Franklin scandal, right, thank you. And now we've got P. Diddy. I mean, it almost seems like there's a through line here where this is almost like a kind of like a standard operating method. It's pretty disturbing. Obviously, the crimes against children are bad, but from the standpoint that the whole world and politics might be run by this criminal underground network that's hidden in plain sight, isn't that almost, I don't want to put like a value on how bad a particular crime is, but isn't that kind of part of this as well?
Yeah, the blackmail is integral. I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, and the Epstein network is almost a carbon copy of the Franklin network. And then I wrote Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And Henry Vincent, who I co-authored the book with, he ran the largest gay escort service that's ever been uncovered in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And the CIA would use his escorts to compromise closeted politicians.
Wow.
And then my last book about Watergate, at the heart of Watergate is a CIA honey trap blackmail operation. Yeah. And how that's been covered up all these years is kind of amazing, because there's been some pretty good books written about it.
Yeah, this is another interesting topic I really want to delve into with you, hopefully another day, because Watergate is fascinating, and it's kind of like maybe one of the least understood. I think people today have kind of basically forgotten about it, but it's so tied into the Kennedy assassination. And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about that perhaps Watergate touches on is Iran-Contra, because that seems to be really kind of inextricably linked to Jeffrey Epstein as well. I know you've gone so deep on this, we could talk about it for hours, but what can you say about Jeffrey Epstein and Iran-Contra?
Well, he was buddies with an Anand Khashoggi, who was a big-time arms dealer, and he was part of the October surprise, which is part of Iran-Contra. What happened there was the Iranians held a bunch of American hostages. They had a revolution. We imposed the Shah. Our CIA overthrew a democratically elected government and basically installed a dictator, the Shah, and trained his Gestapo-like police. And there was a revolution in Iran. It was a religious revolution against the Shah. And a number of Iranian students took a number of Americans hostage. And the Reagan administration, actually, William Casey and George Herbert Walker Bush and Stan Pottinger, who plays a role in Epstein, they made a deal with the Iranians, and they said, if you can hold the hostages until Ronald Reagan is in office, we'll sell you cheap. We'll give you a good deal on armaments. And at that point, we were selling armaments to Iraq, and we were selling armaments to both sides of that war. And that was the deal, and it made Carter look very weak, those hostages being held by Iran. And Carter, well, that put a death nail in Carter's presidential hopes. I mean, they could have been slim at best, maybe, I don't know. But when he took office, he fired a bunch of CIA people. And that can always be dangerous, is firing CIA people. Nixon fired some CIA people, and he didn't treat the CIA with much respect. And Kennedy fired some CIA people. And those three presidencies really didn't work out so well.
Along those lines, I think it's important to look at the parallels between Kennedy, Nixon, and now Trump. They really, or at least Trump before this week, seemed like the three presidents who were really challenging the CIA and the deep state, and they each sort of had their own challenges coming from them, wouldn't you say?
Well, here's the telltale sign: military spending. And we saw Kennedy cut military spending. We saw Nixon, over the course of Nixon's presidency, he cut military spending by 64%. Trump did not do that, and he did not cut CI spending. I was not a believer in Trump because I wanted to see if he would cut military spending, and he didn't. And I think that is an indication of where his bread is buttered.
Yeah.
That he's somehow beholden to the CIA, because Jeffrey Epstein was very much an intelligence operation. We know that. And it was covered up at the highest levels of the government. And it was covered up, as I'm sure you know, Alexandra Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Miami. And the Palm Beach Police Department did an amazing investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, and they had 23 victims. And they had the statements of 5, and then they had the corroborating statements of 17 victims. And they were going to indict Jeffrey Epstein on 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor and 1 count of lewd and lascivious molestation. They were ready to go. I've got the arrest warrant, and that case was taken away and given to a very corrupt grand jury. And I don't know if your listeners and viewers are aware of grand juries. Grand juries sound like the gods of jurisprudence have spoken, but actually With a grand jury, a special prosecutor is chosen. And grand jurors are just simply people who have shown up for jury duty and been funneled into a grand jury. And the special prosecutor, it's not antagonistic. The special prosecutor chooses the witnesses and the evidence that is shown the grand jurors. And there was a New York Supreme Court justice who said that special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And definitely the Epstein grand jury was a ham sandwich. That prosecutor only called 2 of Epstein's victims. She could have called 23 of Epstein victims. And then she undermined their credibility. And one of them was 16. She'd been molested by Epstein when she was 14, and the other one was 16 or 18, and she'd been molested by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 16. And they were calling these victims prostitutes. And that grand jury, I've got the transcripts of that grand jury, and it's so corrupt. It indicted Jeffrey Epstein on 1 count of adult solicitation. And Michael Ryder was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department, and he was a stand-up guy. He took a lot of heat. I mean, a lot of heat for proceeding with the Epstein investigation. And then when he saw that that grand jury didn't indict a single Epstein on a single count of child abuse, he became quite livid, and he went to the Department of Justice and he said, the state is obviously corrupt and the Department of Justice needs to step up here. And at that point, the Department of Justice had a list of 34 victims, but they knew of 40. I have that list, and there's 34 listed, but they knew of 40. And they said that they were going to impanel a grand jury, but lo and behold, they didn't. And we got to discover why they didn't impanel a grand jury. When Alexander Acosta was being vetted by the Trump administration as Secretary of Labor, he was asked, why did you go so light on Epstein? And Acosta said, I was told that Epstein was intelligence and it was above my pay grade and I had to stand down. Now, this is where the power comes into play. There's only 2 people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. And one is the attorney general and one is the president. And at that point, the attorney general was Alberto Gonzales and the president was George Bush II. And there's no way that Alberto Gonzales is going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network without making sure his boss was cool with it. So that emanated from the very top of the political food chain. Like the Franklin scandal was that exact same way. That cover up was basically orchestrated at the highest levels of government. And that's the kind of power that was deployed to cover up Jeffrey Epstein. And then the feds got really sneaky here because according to the Crime Victims' Rights Act, victims of crimes have to be informed about the adjudication of the cases, of their cases. And then they're given, if they want, the possibility to confront their perpetrators. But the Department of Justice did nothing like that. And actually, they worked out a non-prosecution agreement with Jeffrey Epstein, and then they sealed it. So none of those victims had an opportunity to see how the Epstein case was being adjudicated, and none of those victims were able to confront Epstein. And the feds sealed it so no one could look at what it said. And attorneys representing some of the victims in the Palm Beach Post appealed that decision. It went up to the 11th Circuit, and the 11th Circuit ultimately unsealed it, which shows that not every judge is dirty, which is a good thing. And what the feds did was they gave blanket immunity to all of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. Blanket immunity.
Amazing.
And that's how dirty it was. And the way that they did that was just really slimy too. The way that the victims weren't able to see how that case was adjudicated. They weren't able to confront Epstein, and the way that it was sealed. And then, of course, they wanted it sealed because it's a horrific document. It gave it gave all of Epstein's co-conspirators blanket immunity, which is very, very troubling.
Well, I just want to clarify one thing that you're saying. It's a horrific document, not in so much as it's going into explicit details of sexual crimes. It's the opaque, lawyerly way in which this type of stuff is hidden. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. Because this goes to what I was tweeting about the other day, and thank you for retweeting that. I think, I've been watching your work and following what you do for a long, long time, so that really made me happy to see you look at that. But this is this letter from Gerald Lefcourt, who was one of the attorneys representing Epstein. And I mean, it was like the dream team of powerhouse attorneys. You had Dershowitz there, Kenneth Starr. This copy I got from Tom Lucree. But this is basically all that's been released from this letter. It was originally released by Malia Zimmerman in a report that she put out on Fox News on their website, I believe. And the thing that's super weird about it, so this letter was written July 6th, and here's the Fox story. This was July 6, 2007, the letter was written, and Fox News puts out the story July 6th, 2016, 9 years later. I don't know exactly why. Epstein didn't get arrested until 2019. I mean, he was arrested in Palm Beach, of course, and given that sweetheart deal that this letter was all about. But this is all we get, is this, like, it's supposedly a 23-page letter. We get this half a page. It's super low res. You can barely read it. It does seem that Ms. Zimmerman had a higher resolution version of it, because we have this excerpt that talks about how Mr. Epstein was part of the original group that conceived of the Clinton Global Initiative, which is described as the project bringing together a community of global leaders to devise and implement innovative solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges. I wonder if those innovative solutions include blackmailing people and having these dark money operations.
Well, I think that was part of it. I mean, if you look at how things played off, Jeffrey Epstein was providing, I don't think that they were minors, but he was definitely providing younger women to Clinton when Clinton was president. And according to some documentation that was released, not last January, but the January before, one of the victims, her name is Sarah Ransom, she's talking about another victim that had sex with Donald Trump. So I think that if you really want to look at this, and there's a lot of connections between Trump and Epstein, just like there's a lot of connections between Clinton and Epstein. But why did Trump go into this overdrive with covering this up? That's what we have to find out. I mean, that's really important for us to know going forward.
The optics were terrible, undoubtedly. I mean, it certainly, if this was a personal confrontation with someone you were asking a question, that's the reaction of somebody who seems guilty to me. I don't want to jump to that conclusion, obviously, because if it's crimes that we're talking about, we've got to give them the presumption of innocence. But let me take you back to this whole Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump connection, because I think it goes back to Iran-Contra to some extent. Now, Jeffrey Epstein, I want to ask you about this. I don't know if this is an area, I haven't heard you specifically speak about this, so I kind of want to tickle your curiosity if possible. But something that I've been very fascinated with is the fact that Jeffrey Epstein, as recently as 2019, he was flying around in a Boeing 727. And we also have to talk about how, if we want to talk about lists, you are the only guy to actually release any Epstein list in the form of the Black Book, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Epstein flew this Boeing 727. And the reason I find it so strange is that it was a really outdated jet. It was manufactured in 1969, so it was 50 years old, and he was still using it. It had all kinds of analog avionics and systems in it, and it's the most rare type of Boeing jet. So if you're going to fly it to Africa with Bill Clinton and stuff like that, finding parts and mechanics who know how to work on it, why would you keep that jet? You could buy a 737 all day long. It's the most common type of Boeing jet. And I know a lot of super millionaires buy pre-owned jets because of the depreciation and all of that. But 50 years old, it seems unusually old. Is this an angle that you've contemplated at all? Because I have a lot more to discuss about it.
I haven't really contemplated that too much. I have talked to some victims that there was Juliet Bryant, and she met Epstein in South Africa when Epstein was with Spacey and Clinton. And Epstein said, "Come to New York and I'll make you a star." And she went to New York, and that day she was kind of unpacking, and Sarah Kellen, one of Jeffrey Epstein's pimps, told her that she didn't need to unpack, that they were going to fly to the island and they had plenty of clothes for her. And she got on that jet, and Jeffrey Epstein had had a young woman perform oral sex on him when she was 30,000 feet up. So she was trapped. I mean, that's
Right.
how vicious traffickers are. They trap their victims, and Epstein was a very, very good predator.
Well, and of course, any jet could be used to entrap someone and have them do something terrible like that. The unique aspects of the 727, really the most unique aspect of it from this standpoint, is this rear door. When it was designed, the Boeing 727 was a real breakthrough in technology. I do believe it was the first jet to use variable wing geometry, which is common now. You can have a lot of lift for takeoff and low drag for cruising. You know, the wing kind of spreads out, and the ailerons and flaps and all that kind of stuff. But it could slow down and had a very, very low stall speed, and you could actually open this rear door in flight. And things, dead bodies, drugs, JDAM bombs, all kinds of things could be dropped out of the back of it. So it really gives it a very unique kind of characteristic. And I also have looked at some of the other people who have had these Boeing 727s. Another one was operated by Peter Nygaard. And it was very interesting to note that he also has been jammed up on similar. You can see here, it's got the unique tri-jet design. And he had his done up with the interior, had a stripper pole and all kinds of stuff. Have you ever thought about this angle before? Because the Trump shuttle was a fleet of Boeing 727s, and it was basically put under by some, I'm not enough of a financial guy to really necessarily understand the details of this, but of course, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, who's got some kind of connection to certainly Jamal Khashoggi. I don't know what his connection is to Adnan Khashoggi, but Al-Walid bin Talal became an investor in Citigroup. This is the interior of Peter Nygaard's jet, also seemingly done up for parties where you can rape people and have people on stripper poles and stuff like that. But Al-Walid became an investor in Citigroup, and something to do with the refinancing of the loan that allowed Trump to purchase the Trump shuttle caused it to go bankrupt. And all those jets, once the airline goes bankrupt, could be bought for 10 cents on the dollar. We've got beds all over the place here in the interior of Nygaard's jet. They're going to show us the stripper pole in just a second. I don't want to get too focused on this, although it is something.
Yeah, it's kind of off track. I've never looked at the jets per se. I mean, I know what happened on those jets, but I've never really looked into the jets.
My interest in them is from the intelligence standpoint, because there does seem to be just an unusual interest in the 727 from the CIA. And like I said, I know you are very interested in everything that the CIA has been up to over the course of the years. So I don't know. It just seems like a weird connection, and Khashoggi connection.
There are, when you dig into these things, there are some very strange connections, that's for sure. And
Now,
are
what
they coincidences or are they not? We sometimes it's impossible to know.
another interesting connection between Trump and the Khashoggis are this yacht, the Trump Princess. Is that anything that you've ever looked into?
I've looked into it. He sold it, right? He sold it to,
Al Walid,
yeah.
same guy who sank the airline. It just seems oddly connected to me.
It's one of those things. It's difficult to know.
Yeah.
I
Well, anyway, let's get back to Epstein. I don't mean to put you in a spot where you're talking about something you haven't researched. Let's talk about the list, because we've heard so much about this Epstein list, and you raised a point that I agreed with. Calling it the list is perhaps deceptive. It seems a little bit crazy to think that somebody would just keep a list of people who are breaking all kinds of laws. Now, you obtained the diary or the address book of Jeffrey Epstein. You've explained many times how you got that. What can you tell us about this and how this ties into any allegations of a list?
Well, with the Black Book, I got it in 2012, and it was very important for me to, as I've said, there's a lot of victims in that book, well over 100, and to call them, and then they told me what that Epstein was running a network, and then also about the island. So I think I was the first person in the media that knew that Jeffrey Epstein was running a pedophile network and that he would fly victims to this island to be raped and molested. And
Yeah.
what the Black Book is essentially a grail. There are people in the Black Book that are not perpetrators, but there's a lot of perpetrators in the Black Book. And they're also Alfredo Rodriguez was Epstein's house manager, and he was the guy that stole the Black Book. And he tried to sell it to one of the attorneys in Fort Lauderdale that were launching civil suits at Epstein. And the attorney called up the FBI, and the FBI did a sting on him and got the Black Book. Now, there are names that he circled in the Black Book, and he's dead now, but he's implied that they were the ones that were in cahoots with Epstein. And there's a number of names that are circled. And they actually, and then Virginia Giuffre in her lawsuit against Maxwell, she named a number of perpetrators. And so there's double corroboration on some of these perpetrators between the house manager and also Virginia Giuffre.
But let me ask you this, though. Isn't it true? I mean, we've got this list. The house manager, he's certainly of questionable morality to be trying to sell the thing, and to lawyers. He's also of questionable intelligence. Couldn't he just circle any name? And I mean, this is a Black Book. You could put anybody's address in there. Now, true, you did point out that there are certain people who he has lots of different phone numbers for, and how do you get those phone numbers? But still, just having the book, it seems like a way that you could implicate someone. Like, in other words, Elon Musk comes out and says, oh, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. And everybody hears that, and something is implied that Donald Trump is doing something illegal, but it's also sort of known that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, because what are we talking about exactly with the Epstein files? I mean, is this just files that the FBI has on Epstein? And if we know that the FBI has been investigating Epstein, and we know that Donald Trump has interacted with Epstein, doesn't it stand to reason? I mean, it's just a given that he's in the Epstein files, right?
Well, actually, when we get into Alfredo Rodriguez and the people that he circled and the people that Virginia Giuffre named, Virginia Giuffre named Ghislaine Maxwell, and Ghislaine Maxwell is circled. Virginia Giuffre said she was molested by Les Wexner, and Alfredo Rodriguez circled Les Wexner. Virginia Giuffre said she was molested by Bill Richardson, the former New Mexico governor, and also Bill Clinton's energy czar. And Alfredo Rodriguez circled him. Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by the former prime minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and Alfredo Rodriguez circled him. And Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by Alan Dershowitz, and Rodriguez circled him too. Although I think that Virginia kind of backslid a little bit on naming Dershowitz. I think that there was some kind of leverage that was used against her. She was in a very difficult domestic situation, and I think that there was somehow, some way, some leverage was used against her. So she said that she could have made a mistake about Dershowitz, but she was pretty solid. And Donald Trump's name is also circled, but I haven't found Epstein victims that have named Donald Trump. What
Yeah, I
I've
mean,
given
that's what,
you, what I've
sorry.
given you is ones that are corroborated by two people.
Right. I mean, I just wonder, circling names, it could be something that they do. You brought up Dershowitz, and he's a very interesting character in this. I had contacted him about 5 years ago during the pandemic to ask him just legal questions. I mean, I was trying to grow my show and have interesting guests, and I figured everybody's at home for the pandemic, and I had called him to ask him about Governor Cuomo closing down a park, and he just volunteered that, the governor could force you to be vaccinated. So I kind of got into this beef with Dershowitz over the mandatory vaccines.
I saw it. I got a kick out of it.
Thank you. I'm glad you did. I mean, it's nice to be able to tell him off. But what was interesting about this is while I'm yelling at him and calling him a jerk, which, by the way, in my opinion, somebody like Alan Dershowitz should be way above the fray with somebody like me. I mean, who the hell am I? I'm some unknown schmuck on a podcast, and he's this professor of law emeritus at Harvard. So here I am telling him that he's a jerk and that he's getting kicked off of my show, and I'm about to hang up on him. And like a maniac, 5 times in a row, he says, tell me about the Jeffrey Epstein letter. And he's talking about this, this letter that he wrote in cahoots with Gerald Lefcourt that's allegedly 23 pages that we have not seen. Now, I mean, I made a slight mistake in that it's not addressed to Alexander Acosta. It's addressed to Jeffrey Sloman and Matthew Mencel, who I've learned since that interview with Dershowitz that these two guys were the assistant U.S. attorneys, and apparently sophisticated defense lawyers know that you don't go right to the U.S. attorney, you go to the assistant U.S. attorneys, because these are the guys who make the charging decisions and write the indictments. And so Dershowitz and Lefcourt and Kenneth Starr are trying to influence these guys. And this shocking detail I just learned the other day in writing this Twitter thread, but the Daily News focused on the sort of sensational fact that the defense attorney for Jeffrey Epstein, the female defense attorney, had a prior relationship with Mencel. And this was Lily Ann Sanchez. The more shocking aspect to me is that she had this relationship with him while they both worked for the Southern District of Florida U.S. Attorney's Office. So Jeffrey Epstein's defense attorney is a former prosecutor in the Southern District of Florida. I mean, isn't that a pretty stunning detail?
Yeah, I mean, the lead assistant U.S. attorney was Anne-Marie Villafana. And the one that negotiated with her, the specifics on the Epstein team, was Jay Lefkowitz. And those emails, when I said that the Fed's dirty deal had been unsealed in the 11th Circuit, those emails were unsealed too, or a number of those emails. And I've got an email. So they've worked out this very dirty deal where everything is going to be sealed, except the state is going to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein, and it's going to give him 18 months for adult solicitation. And then they did tack on 1 count of unlawful sexual exploitation with a minor. So he was looking at 20 years, and they gave him 18 months, and he did 13 months. But this deal was so dirty, and I've got the emails, this deal was so dirty that the assistant U.S. attorney named Emery Villafana told Epstein's attorney, Jay Lefkowitz, we have to go before this magistrate. They had a special magistrate picked out, and he was the only one, I think, that would be dirty enough to sign off on that deal. And that's in their emails, unbelievably, that they said, well, we got to go before this particular magistrate on Monday. And that is really, I mean, it shows just how that whole thing was very, very corrupt. And that's just another indication of the corruption.
Yeah. And, that 23-page letter has never surfaced as far as I know. I mean, the thing that interested me was Dershowitz's near maniacal interest in trying to understand what it was that I knew about it, because I think it contains information that, if somebody wanted to, could be used certainly to sue Dershowitz, maybe, or other lawyers that were involved there. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but that's the impression that I get from how crazy he was going over the notion that I might know something about it, and everything that you're saying about this deal that it led to. One of the aspects that we learn about in the crooked deal that you're talking about, there was this other letter that was sent to Kenneth Starr, who was also one of the attorneys in the defense team. He was at Kirkland and Ellis at the time. It's also interesting that he was the special prosecutor when Bill Clinton was getting impeached.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this letter to Mr. Starr, this is from Alexander Acosta, and he's super pissed off about this deal because he's saying that this 18 USC section 2255, this is complicated, and we need to get a lawyer involved in this conversation to understand it, but it was somehow precluding all of the victims from bringing any civil suits. It's an interesting detail of this case that so much of the evidence that has come out through civil litigation. Of course, Mike Cernovich takes some kind of credit for getting documents unsealed. I think it probably had more to do with the Miami Herald than him. But what do you think about all that, closing down the civil litigation?
The civil litigation is very dirty. It's like everything that's involved in this case is dirty. And I think that the attorneys in Southern Florida, like Brad Edwards, I think that their hearts were in the right place. They wanted to exact some justice with Epstein because they knew, at least financially, because they knew that there was no justice. And actually, Brad Edwards and Paul Cassell, who had been a former federal judge, they really fought the fact that the victims, that the feds hadn't adhered to the Victims' Rights Crime Act. And they fought that all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court opted not to listen to it. Now, when we get into the lawyers in New York who were working for these victims, ostensibly working for these victims, we get into David Boies and Stan Pottinger, and they're very dirty guys. David Boies has a long history. David Boies, there's a group of retired Israeli Mossad agents, intelligence agents, that do dirty deeds, not dirt cheap, but dirty deeds. And they were hired by David Boies. David Boies goes after his enemies with the firm is called Black Cube. And David Boies utilized Black Cube deployed Black Cube on Rose McGowan, who was in the first wave of actresses that came forward. And then there were some New York Times journalists that were writing an article about Harvey Weinstein. David Boies deployed them. And then there's Theranos, which is, it was written by Elizabeth Holmes, and she was a complete charlatan. She said that she had this blood test that could tell you when you're going to die and what your grandkids are going to have. And it was basically a crystal ball. She sold it as and actually David Boies was on that board, and there were some people that threatened to blow the whistle on Elizabeth Holmes, and David Boies completely threatened them. And David Boies was on that board, and there were some people that threatened to blow the whistle on Elizabeth Holmes, and David Boies completely threatened them. And David Boies threatened them. And David Boies completely 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 threatened And then we get into Stan Pottinger, and David Boies hired Stan Pottinger to help him litigate these cases. And Stan Pottinger is really dirty, really dirty. And he was an assistant U.S. attorney. He covered up so many things. He covered up the Kent State murders in Ohio. He covered up COINTELPRO. He covered up CIA's chaos. He did a lot of covering up when he was an assistant U.S. attorney. And then this kind of gets back to Iran. When he got out of, when he left the government, he thought to himself, I've helped all these guys get off and make a lot of money, and I'm going to be a criminal now, and I'm going to make some money. So he was at the very beginning of the October surprise when Casey and Bush Sr. were negotiating that the Iranians would hold the hostages until Reagan won. I think he was at the first or second meeting, and he was actually busted putting together an arms deal with two Iranian brothers, the Hashemi brothers from Iran. And the Department of Justice, the Southern District of New York, under Rudolph Giuliani, had tape recordings of him putting this deal together, telling how the Hashemis could hide the money and the best ways to get the armaments from New York or from the United States to Iran. And he should have been indicted. He should have gone to prison. I mean, at that point, Iran was an enemy combatant state, and he's helping Iran put together an arms deal. And what happened with that case is that integrity, that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, said that he lost the tapes.
Wow.
That's why they didn't go after Stan Pottinger, is because they lost. You would think, I mean, this is kind of like, I mean, that's so disingenuous. It's very obvious that that Rudolph Giuliani, and the lie that we had on July 7th in that memo is the same kind of disingenuousness of the government just telling us
wait a minute,
bald-faced lie.
Wait a minute. We got that memo on July 7th. Wait a second now. Oh, July 6th? What's the date of all that? It seems like a lot of stuff is happening on July 7th, isn't it? Or is it July 6th? I guess it's July 6th that the letter gets written. I don't know, that's weird, because it did seem like a strange time for that memo to come out, right? It was like Sunday night. Yeah, July 6th is when this original...
Yeah, it was July 6th. I didn't access it till July 7th.
Oh, but it came out on July 6th, the thing that said there is... Yeah. So wait a minute, why is everything in this case happening on July 6th? The left court letter is July 6th. This Zimmerman article is July 6th. This weird drop now in 2020, and it's 9 years later, July 6th, 2025. This is 9 years after the letter is written. This is an interesting pattern.
I could not... I cannot give you a cogent answer to that.
Let me take you back to Boies, Schiller, Flexner for a second, because I did actually go to one of the hearings, or a couple of the hearings from Jeffrey v. Dershowitz, and it was super interesting to be able to actually observe Alan Dershowitz in the courtroom. I didn't understand. I was like, wait a minute. Alan Dershowitz is this super duper lawyer. Why is he hiring these other lawyers? Why isn't he just sitting here talking for himself? And he was like running around the courtroom, whispering in these guys' ears, telling them what to do. But his whispering was so loud that everybody could hear it. And it became apparent to me during those proceedings why he did it that way. Because he was trying to disqualify, and I think he succeeded at doing this, trying to disqualify the entire Boies law firm, saying that he had initially contacted them to get them to represent him, and that he had sent certain information about the case to their Boston office. And then the guy called him back went over the weekend, and then on Monday called him back and said, oh, it's a conflict of interest. So he was doing all this complex, tricky stuff that ultimately got Boies, Schiller, Flexner disqualified, or some of the lawyers from Boise disqualified. It seemed like a real lawfare kind of angle. And then years later, I was watching Dishonest Dershowitz's podcast where he let it slip that he actually worked with David Boies on, I think, the Bush v. Gore. And he kind of like looked like he regretted saying that after he said it. But I'm very suspicious of Boies Schiller Flexner. Hunter Biden was an attorney at Boies Schiller Flexner, and he left there in 2014. Just totally coincident with that guy, Kenneth Rakashev, sending him like $150,000 to buy a Porsche. So there's all kinds of questions about Boies Schiller Flexner, and I agree, David Boies.
David Boies likes to destroy people. That's what he likes to do. I mean, he likes to destroy people. He doesn't just want to litigate against them. He wants to destroy them. And Stan Pottinger is a nasty piece of work. And actually, the Victims' Compensation Fund and that deal that was worked out with the feds is the feds said that there had to be a Victims' Compensation Fund. And that was overseen by Jordana Feldman, who was integral to the 9/11 victims compensation, and then also David Boies. David Boies was, I think, I'm kind of surmising here, but I think that David Boies is probably the preeminent architect of that. And
of what? Of the fund?
The fund and the parameters of the fund. And
which are unknown, right? They don't ever publish what these parameters are.
No, we have no idea. We have no idea what criteria they use. No idea. And 225 women appealed to the fund for compensation, and the fund or program awarded 150 women settlements. And if you got a settlement, you had to sign an NDA that you wouldn't go after any of your other perpetrators.
But wait a second. Isn't that problematic in and of itself? I know you're not an attorney. I'm not asking you for a legal opinion, but how can you have somebody sign a non-disclosure agreement to cover up a crime? It just doesn't seem... This is weird.
Well, that's how it went down. And David Boies... I mean, we could talk to David Boies about it. I don't think David would be willing to talk to me
about it, I'm sure, yeah.
I don't know if David likes me very much.
I wouldn't think so. Probably doesn't like me, and he doesn't even know me.
He knows me.
Huh. Well, let me ask you this, and I'm calling for some speculation, but you've studied this so much, you know so much about the details here. Have you considered the possibility that any of this litigation, like I can't put my finger on it, but I got a very strong sense that something was really wrong with this Giuffre v. Dershowitz litigation. And weren't there allegations that, yes, of course, Virginia Giuffre was a victim, but at some point when she grew older and was no longer a minor, she became kind of a co-conspirator. Is there any possibility, or have you ever considered that some of that litigation with Virginia Giuffre, particularly since she was represented by David Boies, could have been weaponized to achieve a certain goal beyond what is being litigated in the briefs there?
Boies and Dershowitz do not like each other. I know that for a fact. And they might have worked together in 2000 with Gore, but they don't like each other. I don't know the extent or cause of that animosity, but they definitely don't like each other. Here's the thing about Virginia. When you're being trafficked, it's like you're in a cult. Jeffrey Epstein was like a cult leader, and one of your jobs is to go get other victims. I mean, that's what these guys do. And if you get other victims, you get more money. And that's how these guys get kids, is they get kids to recruit kids. Virginia was sent to Thailand, and she was supposed to, they were going to give her a massage. Epstein and Maxwell were going to pay for a massage class, but they'd also bought a child in Thailand that they wanted her to bring back to the United States. And Virginia had had a horrific life. I mean, the first time she was molested, she was 7. She was on the streets as a kid. She was basically became a prisoner of a guy named Ron Eppinger, a notorious pedophile, who put her in an apartment, and pedophiles come in during the day, come in during the night, and molest her. And then the FBI was closing in on him, and then he hawked her to another guy, and he kind of did the same thing to Virginia. And then the FBI broke down their door one night. Virginia was in bed with this much older guy. I think she was 15 at that point. And then she got a job at Mar-a-Lago, and that's within a month of all that stuff happening to her. She met Maxwell, and Maxwell recruited her for Epstein. And the thing about Virginia is she was already conditioned by these other pedophiles. She knew exactly how to act. I mean, they didn't have to train her at all. But here's the thing with Virginia. She went to Thailand, and she decided that she did not want to buy a kid or take that kid back to the United States, the one that Epstein and Maxwell bought. And she met a guy who became her husband, and that would be kind of a bad deal for her. But anyway, and they were married like within a week. But I give her a lot of credit for just saying, I'm not going to indoctrinate another kid into this type of a lifetime, this type of a life.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can see how she might have sympathy for somebody like that. I guess what I'm getting at is I've heard you speak quite a bit about your book, The Truth About Watergate, and I totally agree with this. I mean, obviously you know so much more about Watergate than I do, but it seemed obvious to me. You talk about a conspiracy within a conspiracy. And I took that to mean that there's a lot of people involved in that Watergate break-in, and they don't all necessarily know what the others are up to. So if we've got 5 people in a conspiracy and 2 of them decide we're going to screw the other guys, it's kind of like that. And, since I started Crowdsource the Truth almost 9 years ago, I've been subjected to a lot of tricks and games and people taking me to court and trying to get me in trouble. And one of the things they love to do is to publicly stage some sort of a dust up so that you think like, oh, well, this guy and this guy are obviously enemies. They couldn't be working together. And I just wonder if Dershowitz and Boys, the look on Dershowitz's face when he let this slip on his podcast that he had previously worked with Boys, I just got the sense that he said something that he didn't intend to say. And look, I don't know Dershowitz. I've only spoken to him those 2 times on interviews and 2 or 3 times on the phone threatening to sue him over crap that he's done to me. He's a weird guy. And I'm trying to understand the nuance behind what he says. I don't know. It's a fascinating subject.
Dershowitz is also a nasty piece of work. He thinks that essentially pedophilia should be legal. I think he thinks the age of consent should be 14, regardless of the age of the other person. And I don't think that he has much respect for women. When we published the Black Book and also the flight logs, Dershowitz was interviewed, and in the article that I wrote, and he said that he only traveled with in a previous article, he had said they only traveled with his wife, that he'd never traveled alone. Well, he's on those flight logs, traveling with young women named Claire and Tatiana, and his steel trap mind becomes a little rusty when he's asked about those questions and the flight logs. So. Yeah.
He conveniently forgets certain things when he wrote the letter.
He conveniently, yes.
Yeah. He wrote this article. 22-year-old article resurfaces as the Harvard law professor is scrutinized over the Jeffrey Epstein ties. And this is what you're talking about, where he said you should be 14 or whatever. He's defending it.
Yeah, he's a nasty piece of work. There were the lawyers in this case. Dershowitz was good friends with Epstein, and he had one goal, and that was to destroy these young girls, to destroy their credibility. And that's what he set about to do.
Really terrible. It's amazing that Dershowitz is still kicking around. I know you've got a bit of a tight schedule, Nick, and you've been really generous with your time here. We should tell people about some of the other things that you're doing. You've got a Patreon page that people can join to support your work. If people go to patreon.com/the Nick Bryant podcast, they can support your work. You've also got a nonprofit going, why don't you tell us?
Well, I started a nonprofit 501c3 called Epstein Justice. And we're obviously not going to get justice for the Epstein victims and by the regular modalities. Two Republican and two Democratic administrations have covered up Epstein. And then Trump wants to put a coffin nail in right now. So we're going to have to, our best bet is to get a congressional commission formed, which is going to be a lot of work. That's going to have an independent investigation of really what happened with Epstein. And I believe that there's a lot of blackmail in our political system, and Americans have to know how corrupt and perfidious their political system is. And then we've got to make sure that there isn't any more Epsteins and or Franklins. And
P. Diddy's.
and the thing about it is, according to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of American girls and 5% of American boys have been molested as underage. So, and people in the field think it's slightly conservative for girls and very conservative for boys. But if you just go with the CDC numbers, you've got over 50 million Americans that have been molested. And then, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, 240,000 to 325,000 women and children are trafficked in the United States every year. And where this gets mind-boggling is, so we've got millions of Americans that have been molested, and there's probably millions of Americans that have been trafficked as children. And according to the 2023 Federal Human Trafficking Report, only 664 individuals were charged with trafficking children. So there's millions of kids that are being molested and trafficked, and 664 were charged. And then you've got tens of thousands, you've got millions of hours of child abuse material on the internet. And last year in 2024, there was 1,375 people that were charged with making or disseminating child abuse material. So what we have here is a fraction of 1% of these people actually see any kind of justice. And this is why the Epstein case is so important, because if we allow the Justice Department to be unresponsive to victims in the Epstein case, a proven trafficking case, that sends a message to millions of victims in the United States that they have no voice and no hope for justice. That's why Epstein Justice is so important. We have webinars every week where we teach how the best ways that you can pressure your federal representatives into supporting a Truth and Reconciliation Congressional Commission. We do need that with Epstein, and we need to clean up the sewer that our politics have become. And this will be, I think, a congressional commission. It's not going to be easy, but I think that it can be done. There was a workers' rights movement, and ultimately workers got rights. There was a civil rights movement, and ultimately minorities got rights. There was a women's right movement, and women got rights. There was a gay rights movement, and gays got rights. So now we need a movement to protect our children. I mean, that's what we need now. The civil rights, the labor rights, the women's rights, gay rights, these were not easy battles to win, but we ultimately did win. And it's up to us now to start protecting our children. And this commission will be the best way to start.
Yeah, well put, Nick. I also want to let people know you've got a YouTube channel they can go to. And you're right, it is important for the victims to have voices. The other danger, of course, is that if this small 1% fraction is barely ever getting prosecuted, it also sends a message to the perpetrators that you can do this and nothing is going to happen. So that's absolutely terrible. I want to thank you for taking your time to speak with me today. I hope you'll come back. There's so much more to discuss. And people who want to sponsor Crowdsource the Truth can do that on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. People who follow me on X at JG_CSTT can sponsor the show by subscribing there. Nick, thank you so much. Have a great day. I hope I'll speak to you soon.
Okay. Take care. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for watching.